The soft tap of a spoon against fine china echoed through the otherwise quiet kitchen. Charlotte Whitmore sat opposite her husband, Douglas, her posture composed, her hands resting calmly in her lap. She waited, not with nervousness, but with the still restraint shaped by decades of endurance. Sunlight poured through the window, illuminating the silver threaded through Douglas's hair, the same strands she once traced tenderly with her fingertips, back when love still felt present. He avoided her eyes. "To be honest," he said coolly, "I regret marrying you." The words weren't harsh or loud, they carried no anger. They were delivered with the same detachment one might use to discuss the weather or a financial report. Charlotte didn't flinch. She didn't need clarification. The sentence alone was heavy enough to fracture something inside her, something that had been under silent strain for years. She didn't ask for reasons. She didn't shed tears. Slowly, she rose, steadying herself briefly with a hand on the table, then turned and left the room without a single word. Upstairs, their bedroom looked preserved, untouched, like a hotel suite never truly lived in. The bed was perfectly made. Her robe hung neatly behind the door. His cufflinks sat in their familiar tray. 40 years of shared routines, of roles performed and repeated, suddenly felt empty, borrowed. Charlotte opened the closet and retrieved her old suitcase, dust clinging to the zipper. Every action was deliberate. She folded her clothes carefully, not because she intended to come back, but because she still honored what they once had. When her hand reached for her worn leather journal, she hesitated. Within those pages lived decades of unspoken thoughts, unseen tears, and forgotten joys. She held it quietly for a moment before placing it back. That journal belonged in the house she had kept alive, even if she no longer did. Downstairs, Douglas remained seated, staring into his coffee cup as though it might reveal answers. Charlotte grabbed her keys, opened the front door, and stepped into the cool morning air. She carried nothing unnecessary, and for the first time in many years, she felt light. Charlotte had met Douglas Whitmore when she was 23. She had just begun her first year working as a high school librarian in a modest Midwestern town. Douglas was 27, already overseeing his family's hardware business. He wasn't romantic, no handwritten notes, no bouquets, but he was reliable, consistent, safe. And after growing up with a father who yelled and a mother who diminished herself, Charlotte believed stability might be enough. They married the following spring. Charlotte wore her sister's wedding dress. Douglas built their first dining table with his own hands. They didn't have much money, but they created a life together. When their daughter Haley was born, Charlotte left her job to stay home. 3 years later, their son Liam arrived. She told herself it wasn't a sacrifice, it was love, motherhood, what women were supposed to do. Douglas worked long hours. Charlotte kept everything running. She packed lunches, baked birthday cakes, stitched Halloween costumes by hand. Every Sunday she made pancakes, and the family ate together, even when conversation felt thin. She took pride in the unseen details. Socks always paired, sheets changed every Thursday, dinner served at precisely 6. She knew Douglas preferred his coffee strong and unsweetened, and that he disliked overly toasted bread. As the years passed and the children moved out, the house fell quiet. Charlotte imagined they would travel or discover a shared hobby. Instead, Douglas retreated inward. He buried himself in news articles and weather forecasts. Their conversations dwindled into single-word replies. Sometimes he walked away while she was still speaking. She convinced herself this was simply marriage settling into its long, silent rhythm. Still, she sought joy in small places. She joined a book club, volunteered at the library, experimented with new recipes. Whenever she cooked something different, she served it with a gentle smile, hoping Douglas would notice. Sometimes he did, often he didn't. What hurt most wasn't the silence, it was how easily she adapted to it, how she learned to expect less, how she became grateful for scraps, a compliment, a passing smile. She never asked for more. She didn't want to appear unappreciative. What she didn't realize was how gradually she had erased herself. It was a late spring Saturday when her quiet unraveling reached its limit. Charlotte had spent 2 weeks preparing for a family brunch. Haley and her husband were bringing the children. Liam was flying in from Chicago. Even Douglas had shown mild interest when she marked it on the calendar. Charlotte immersed herself in the details. Fresh flowers, her mother's linen napkins, blueberry muffins baked from scratch, and a warm quiche filled with roasted vegetables, just the way Douglas once loved it. That morning, she tied on her apron and greeted Douglas as he came downstairs. He was already dressed in a golf shirt, scrolling through his phone. She gestured toward the table with a hopeful smile. "I made all your favorites." He glanced at the food briefly. "Didn't we have this last year?" The remark stung, but she brushed it aside. "It's Haley's favorite," she replied, straightening the silverware. Haley arrived in her usual whirlwind, children rushing past Charlotte like a gust of wind. She offered her mother a distracted wave before disappearing into the living room. Liam arrived shortly after, warm, attentive, giving Charlotte a real hug and praising how wonderful the house smelled. They sat down together. Conversation flowed between Haley's work, the children's activities, and Liam's apartment search. Douglas contributed occasionally, mostly with sarcastic remarks or commentary on the news. Charlotte, as always, remained engaged, quietly absorbing everything, the steady center of the room. Halfway through the meal, Haley picked up a muffin, took a bite, and grimaced. "Mom, these are really dry. Did you change the recipe?" Charlotte blinked. "No, it's the same one I've always used. Maybe it's the altitude or something," Haley muttered, setting the muffin down. Douglas laughed. "She's always been good at overcomplicating things." He took a sip of coffee and added, "Remember that birthday cake she made for Liam and forgot the sugar?" The table laughed. "I was 6, Liam said. "I thought she was trying to poison me," Douglas grinned. "At least it looked nice." "She always puts in the effort. It's the execution that trips her up." More laughter. Charlotte sat motionless, hands folded, eyes fixed on her plate. Heat welled behind her eyes, but she forced a smile and dabbed her mouth. Liam noticed and murmured, "The quiche is really good, Mom," but the moment had already slipped away. It wasn't loud, it wasn't overtly cruel, but it was intimate and cutting. Her family had just laughed at her, in the home she built, over food she made with love. After dessert, Charlotte quietly excused herself. No one followed. She stood alone in the kitchen, hands submerged in warm, soapy water, washing the same dishes she had washed thousands of times before. Laughter drifted in from the living room, easy, carefree. No one noticed she was gone. Or perhaps they did, and simply didn't mind. That was when something inside her shifted. Not shattered, Charlotte didn't break dramatically. That wasn't who she was. But something settled deep in her chest, like a door closing without a sound. That evening, after everyone had left and Douglas had given her a distracted pat on the shoulder, saying, "You did good today," she nodded politely. She waited until he disappeared down the hallway before sitting at the kitchen table beneath the soft light. She opened her journal and wrote one line. "I think I'm done being the joke in my own story." 3 weeks passed. Douglas resumed his routines, golf meetings, evenings in front of the television. He didn't notice that Charlotte stopped making elaborate meals or reminding him of appointments. Her dinners became simple: eggs, toast, canned soup. He never asked why. He never asked anything. One Tuesday morning, Charlotte stood before her closet holding a dress she hadn't worn in years. Deep green, elegant, modest, it reminded her of the woman she used to be. She tried it on. It still fit. She didn't cry. Instead, she inhaled deeply, the breath that comes before an irreversible choice. She retrieved the old suitcase from the back of the closet, the same one she once used to visit her sister in Oregon. It still carried a faint lavender scent. Slowly, she began packing, not out of fear or sorrow, but with purpose. She packed necessities. A few outfits, her favorite sweater, a framed photo of Haley and Liam as children. And one thing just for herself, her journal. That afternoon, Douglas came home to find her in the kitchen holding a cup of tea. "Did you pick up the dry cleaning?" he asked without looking at her. She didn't respond. "Charlotte," he said again, irritated. She looked at him fully and said calmly, "I'm leaving." This time he blinked first. "Leaving? For how long?" She gestured toward the suitcase by the stairs. "I'm staying with Nora for a while." "For what?" he asked, confused more than angry. "What's going on?" Her voice stayed steady. "I need to remember who I am. Because whatever this is, it isn't living." He laughed bitterly. "So now you're the victim." She shook her head softly. "Not anymore." He didn't stop her, he didn't follow. He didn't ask her to stay. And that told her everything. Charlotte left without drama, no slammed doors, no speeches. Just clarity. She had entered that house as a bride, raised her children there, poured love into every corner. Now she walked away carrying only what belonged to her. Her peace, her voice, her choice. Nora opened the door before Charlotte even knocked. "You don't need to explain," she said, stepping aside. "The guest room is yours as long as you want." The first night was the hardest, not because Charlotte missed Douglas, but because the quiet felt unfamiliar. No one asked what was for dinner. No one interrupted her thoughts with demands. No one made her feel like an inconvenience in her own life. She sat on the twin bed, suitcase still closed, and let the silence stretch. It wasn't comforting, yet. But it was real. That night she wrote in her journal, "I'm not angry, I'm not bitter. I'm not broken, I'm just tired of being invisible. And today, I chose to be seen, even if only by myself." The following days passed in a blur. Nora left flowers on the nightstand and a fresh towel on the door hook. Charlotte helped with dishes, sat in the sunroom with tea, joined Nora for errands. But inside, she felt hollow, like a version of herself had been peeled away. She wandered at night. Once she stood in the kitchen at 2 a.m., gripping the edge of the counter as the clock ticked in the dark. She didn't cry, she didn't scream. She just stood there numb and quiet, trying to remember how it felt to simply exist without being useful. She thought about all the things she'd done right, the birthdays, the encouragements, the quiet forgiveness, and how little of it had ever been truly seen. And still, she didn't blame anyone, not Douglas, not even her children. She just realized she had built a life around being needed. But now, no one really needed her. Not as a person, just as a function. On the fourth night, she finally cried. Not loud, not dramatic, just slow, steady tears that rolled down her cheeks while she sat on the guest bed holding her journal. But when the tears stopped, something stirred beneath them. Not hope, not yet, but awareness. This was not the end. This was the beginning. Charlotte didn't make an announcement. She didn't tell her children she had left. She didn't call Douglas to explain. She simply stopped showing up for a life that had slowly erased her. And at first, no one seemed to notice. Douglas went on as if she had taken a weekend away. He left for work, ate his dinners in front of the TV, and tossed his socks onto the floor without a second thought. But over time, the shape of her absence began to take form. He couldn't find the tax records. He didn't know how to access the insurance account. He called one afternoon, voice flat. "Have you scheduled a time to come get your things?" "I've already taken what I need," Charlotte replied. "You mean not yet?" "No, Douglas, I mean not at all." There was silence on the line, then a scoff. "So, you're really throwing it all away, after one bad conversation?" Charlotte exhaled, her voice calm. "This isn't about one conversation. It's about a lifetime of being overlooked. I just finally stopped pretending not to notice." He didn't yell, he didn't beg, he simply said, "Well, that's sad," and hung up. A week later, he texted again. "Where's the file with the medical records?" "In the cabinet under the printer," she replied. "Same place it's been for 10 years. No emojis, no explanations. That was the moment Douglas began to understand. Not all at once, but in fragments. The way the bills didn't get paid, the way birthdays passed without cake, the way the house felt colder, emptier, less like a home, and more like a shell. Her absence wasn't just a void. It was a mirror. He had mistaken her consistency for simplicity, her silence for contentment, her presence for permanence. And now, without her, he was exposed. Meanwhile, Charlotte was changing in small, steady ways. Nora noticed it first. "You're glowing a little," she said one morning over coffee. Charlotte smiled. "That's just my moisturizer." "No," Nora replied. "It's something else. You don't shrink anymore when you talk about him." And it was true. Charlotte wasn't angry. She wasn't out to prove anything. But she was rooted now in her own voice, her own body, her own quiet power. The shift didn't go unnoticed by her children either. Haley texted, "Dad says you're not answering." "Are you okay?" Charlotte stared at the screen for a long time. In the past, she would have replied instantly with reassurance. This time she simply wrote, "I'm okay. I just don't want to keep pretending I'm not hurt." There was no reply. Not immediately, but 3 days later, another message arrived. "I guess I didn't realize how far things had gone. I'm sorry." And just like that, the silence began to crack, not with confrontation but with truth. Charlotte didn't need to shout. Her leaving had spoken volumes. Charlotte hadn't planned to return to the house, not even once. She had already taken everything she needed, her journal, a few clothes, her peace. But when Douglas texted weeks later with an unfamiliar tone, careful, almost respectful, she sensed something different. "I cleaned out the attic, found a few of your things. Would you like to come pick them up? I can be out of the house if you prefer." She agreed, not because she owed him anything, but because she deserved closure, the kind that comes from facing something with eyes wide open. It was a sunny afternoon when she pulled into the driveway of the house they had shared for nearly 40 years. The garden beds she once tended were overgrown. The front steps looked crooked. The mailbox still leaned to the left. Douglas opened the door. He looked older. Not just older, tired, deflated, smaller than she remembered. "I didn't expect you to come," he said. "I didn't expect you to ask," she replied. They stood in awkward silence until he stepped aside and gestured toward a few boxes by the staircase. "These are yours. I wasn't sure what to do with them." She walked over and opened the top one. Photo albums, a few cookbooks, a shawl her mother had made. Simple things, but they carried weight. "Thank you," she said. Then Douglas said something unexpected. "I read your journal." Charlotte's chest tightened. "I didn't leave it for you. I know, but I needed to understand, and now I do." She looked at him directly, her voice steady. "Then you understand I stopped being your wife long before I packed my suitcase." He nodded slowly. "I thought you'd always be there, like the floor or the roof. I didn't realize you had an end." She didn't smile, but she didn't cry either. "I tried to tell you," she said, not with yelling, but with effort, with presence, with hope. "You just weren't listening." "I didn't know how to love someone who didn't need fixing," he whispered. "You were whole, Charlotte, and I think I resented that." She didn't offer comfort, just clarity. "I'm not here to blame you. I'm here to say goodbye." As she picked up the smallest box and turned to leave, Douglas stood still, hands in his pockets, watching her go. And before she closed the door behind her, she looked back one last time. "For what it's worth," she said gently, "I hope one day you learn to see people before they leave." Then she stepped out free, clear, and entirely her own. Back at the cabin, a quiet place tucked between pine trees and the glimmer of a still lake, Charlotte stood alone on the porch. The sun was beginning to set, casting warm gold across the water. She held her journal in one hand, a cup of tea in the other. She hadn't written in it yet. She didn't need to. For the first time in years, she wasn't surviving out of duty or obligation. She was simply living on her terms. She planted lavender by the front steps, baked sourdough from scratch just because she liked the smell, and taught small watercolor classes at the local community center. She no longer checked her phone waiting for apologies or explanations. She didn't chase validation. She wasn't trying to be seen because now she saw herself. One evening, she wrote just one sentence in her new journal. "I didn't leave to be alone. I left to become whole. And that changed everything. To anyone watching from the outside, her story might look like quiet retreat. But to Charlotte, it was a return to herself. To those who have been made to feel invisible, take this with you. You don't have to be loud to reclaim your life. You just have to be true. Like, share, comment, and choose yourself every single day.